Well, hello again. Today is the 105th legislative day. Today's May 1st, so happy May Day. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about royalty versus taxes and the difference between the two of them. So royalty is an old term, comes from British law. Back 100 or more years ago, the British government owned land that had minerals on them. And so they would hire companies to come and mine that mineral wealth, and a royalty part of it, a piece of that production, belonged to the government that owned the land. So that's how we come up with a royalty payment. It's very similar to a book author or a songwriter who writes a book or writes a song and then gives it to a producer or a publisher who then distributes, prints. The royalty share is what comes back to the person that created, the owner of that book or that song. So royalty represents ownership, resource ownership. So Alaska has 365 million acres of land. About 2/3 of it, 222 million acres, belongs to the federal government. The state of Alaska has about 97 million acres. We should have about 100 million, but there's still some out to still claim. The native corporations have about 45 million, and private property ownership is 0.9 million acres. So a very tiny amount is actually in private hands in Alaska. Alaska, the state government, owns the subsurface rights. So the land that we have claimed as state government has a lot of oil on it, also has minerals, gold, silver, zinc, things like that. Some of the native corporation land also has those minerals on it. So the state government rents that land where there is mineral to a company that then produces it. And it's out of that production that the state itself gets a royalty share. So they get a share of the value of the produced product. So in Alaska, we have a royalty rate that's set in contracts with the companies that are going to produce the entity, the minerals or the oil or gas, and it's 12.5% to 16.6% is the typical royalty rate. Now that royalty goes into the permanent fund. 25% of that goes into our permanent fund, and that is what has grown that fund, along with some very, very good financial management over the years, into the more than $50 billion that permanent fund is worth now. And of course, out of that comes your permanent fund dividend. So the clarification here is that the royalty is the owner's share. You know, you hear a lot about a lot of statements like, it's our oil. And indeed it is. And what we get is our royalty share. And that royalty share is across the board. It doesn't matter what the price of oil is. We always get our royalty share. So the royalty doesn't care how much the company is making. Maybe the company is spending $47 to get a barrel of oil out of the ground, and they're only selling it for $50. It doesn't matter. The state will still get 12.5% to 16.5% or 16.6% royalty. On the other hand, the company might be spending $47 to get a barrel of oil out of the ground, and they're getting $100 for it. So 12.5% to 16.6% isn't quite such a large share or such a large take from that producer. So the royalty never changes, and it doesn't care what the producer or the company, the taxpayer, is making on that product. On the other hand, we have taxes. Taxes are actually the setting of a social policy. So we have a severance tax, and we want that tax to be fair. We want it to be balanced because we want businesses to be here, whether it's a corporate income tax or whether it's a production tax on oil or a tax on minerals. We want it to be a balanced tax. If we make the tax really high, it actually will diminish the behavior. And that's kind of what we do, shaping social behavior with taxes on alcohol and cigarettes, right? We create very high taxes on it, and it does cause behavior to diminish. So taxes set a social policy. When the government takes taxes on, for example, oil or gas, we use that money to fund the policies or the programs that the society, the citizens, want. So that's the difference. When you hear that it's our oil and it's our fair share, what's being referred to is the royalty. 25% of those royalties go into the permanent fund, and out of that comes your dividend. Now, something that's often lost on people is because of these royalties, in March and April, $54 million went into our permanent fund. That's just 2 months of this year. $54 million went into the permanent fund. Now, the reason partly that the royalty is continuing to bring in so much money to the permanent fund is production has actually increased. Because right now, we have a balanced tax in place on oil. And in fact, this month, approximately more than 50,000 more barrels of oil were produced than this time last year. We're seeing in the last 2 years the production of oil increasing because we have a fair tax policy in place. And that adds more royalty oil, which is our ownership, to the permanent fund. So more production, which is what we want to see on the North Slope, means more royalties going into the permanent fund and ultimately results in more taxes with a fair tax policy. So these are subjects that get a lot of discussion. One of the things that we are talking a lot about is the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend and whether the earnings of that permanent fund should be used to pay for some of government's services. So I have here an original memo. This came from Governor Jay Hammond in July of 1979. It was going to then Senate President Clem Tillion. He was the Senate President at the time and a senator. And in this memo, Jay Hammond says that 50% of the income should go into the general fund. It's out of the general fund that we pay for state government. And 50% of the income should go into specific programs as long as a minimum of 25% of the earnings would be returned to Alaskans. So that's exactly the Senate's sustainable solution to our current fiscal problems. It was outlined by Jay Hammond even back in 1979. Well, thanks for listening. We are still working hard here in Juneau every day to solve and balance our budget and make sure we have the best possible policies for Alaska's families, Alaska's businesses, and Alaska's jobs. Have a good week.